Hey there, it's Leona. Welcome to Zen Mindfulness Shodo. Today, we are going to practice Shodo meditation while focusing on the Kanji character for people. So, let's begin our beautiful journey together. When you write a character, imagine a square about the size of the character that you are going to write like this. First, I'm going to write it. Then I'm going to explain the points and tips for writing the character beautifully in detail. Now, I'm gonna explain in detail the points and tips for writing this character beautifully. The first stroke starts from a point, a bit higher than the middle of the top half of the middle vertical line. Place the brush at about a 45-degree angle while holding it straight up. The middle vertical line is in the middle of the 45-degree angle. And lightly push the brush towards the tip of it in order to stabilize the brush. After you stabilize the brush at about a 60-degree angle, it scoops downward to the left. This stroke moves downward to the left while curving down and getting thinner until the middle horizontal line is in the middle of the stroke, or the space above the starting point of the stroke, and the space below the end point of the stroke are almost the same size. This stroke is created by gradually lifting the brush from the paper while moving it slowly, and from around this point, the brush is released relatively quickly to make a beautiful line. If you move the brush quickly from the starting point, the bottom part becomes blurred, and it becomes difficult to control the links, and the stroke might be either too short or too long. So, in order to produce a beautiful line, I recommend that you write slowly until you get closer to the end point. Next, from the end point of the first stroke, the brush moves upward to the right with a motion like this. The second stroke starts from the middle of the first stroke, or slightly higher than that. Lightly attach only the tip of the brush to the first stroke. It moves downward to the right at about a 45-degree angle while getting thicker. This line might appear straight, but when moving it towards the bottom right, the brush is actually moved slightly upward in a curved line. When this stroke moves downward to the right while curving down, the space between the two strokes becomes small, and that makes the overall character look less beautiful. So be careful not to let this line curve downward. However, it shouldn't curve upward too noticeably either. If you can write it with a very slight upward curve, just enough that it appears straight, the character will look beautiful. As I mentioned earlier, this stroke gradually becomes thicker as it moves downward to the right. Therefore, while moving the brush towards the lower right, gradually increase the brush pressure. When you reach around the same height as the end point of the first stroke, pause lightly here and check to the right. While moving the brush to the right, gradually lift it away from the paper. Finally, the tip of the brush will be the last part to leave the paper, creating this pointy end. One of the key points when writing the character for people is the angle of the first stroke. Let me write examples here. In the example on the left, the angle of the first stroke is closer to the middle vertical line. Assuming this is the middle vertical line, the first stroke leans slightly to the right compared to it, but appears more upright than the sample character. When this happens, the space between these two lines becomes narrower, this space, making the character look less balanced and stable. If the angle of the first stroke gets too close to the middle vertical line, the entire character takes on a tall rectangular shape and looks narrow and less stable. Therefore, I think it would be better to have the stroke lean a bit more to the right than this angle. But what do you all think? In the example on the right, the angle of the first stroke is around 45 degrees, which is a bit closer to the angle of the middle horizontal line, compared to the angle of the first stroke in the sample character. Writing it this way makes the space between the two strokes wider, but as a result, the character for people ends up looking a bit flat and spread out horizontally. Therefore, don't bring the angle of the first stroke too close to the middle vertical line, but also don't bring it too close to the middle horizontal line. If the angle is around 45 degrees, depending on the thickness and length of the strokes, the overall balance of the character can look good. From the impression given by this example of the character for people, having the angle of the first stroke a bit closer to the middle vertical line appears better. However, it's not the angle of the 45 degrees is wrong, or it absolutely must be 60 degrees. It's just that at a glance, the balance looks slightly off compared to the sample character. So if you prefer this example version of the character for people over the sample character, you should practice writing it this way. The key is not sticking to strict angle rules, but finding the angle that creates the desired overall impression and balance for your own preference. The next point is the height of the intersection between the first and second strokes. Let me write some examples here. For instance, if the first stroke is written like this, the second stroke might look like this. Or, if the first stroke is like this, the second stroke might look like this. In the example on the left, assuming this is around the middle of the first stroke, the starting point of the second stroke begins from a much higher position. When written this way, the space between the two strokes becomes wider. But as a result, this part becomes shorter. In the example on the right, assuming this is around the middle of the first stroke, the starting point of the second stroke begins from a lower position. When written this way, the space between the two strokes becomes smaller, and the overall character looks like it has a long torso and short legs. On the other hand, the character on the left looks like a person whose legs are too long compared to the upper body. So, for the starting point of the second stroke, it shouldn't be too high above the middle of the first stroke, nor should it be too low. Rather, it should be somewhere in between. In other words, if you start the second stroke from the middle of the first stroke, or just slightly higher than the middle, you can write the character person or people in a well-balanced and beautiful way. The final point is the height of the ending points of the two strokes. For example, if the first stroke is written like this, the second stroke might end up looking like this. Or if the first stroke is like this, the second stroke might end up looking like this. In the above example, the ending point of the second stroke is higher than the ending point of the first stroke. When written this way, the overall character doesn't look very well balanced or stable. In the bottom example, the end point of the second stroke is lower than the end point of the first stroke. When written this way, the entire character appears to be pulled down towards the bottom right. So when writing the character people or person, try to align the ending points of the two strokes at the same height. This way, the two ending points appear firmly grounded, and the two lines seem to support each other, making the overall character look stable. When the character appears stable in shape, the overall balance also looks good, resulting in a beautifully written character. With these points and tips in mind, let's practice writing the character together. The key points and tips for writing kanji beautifully, as explained in the video, are concisely summarized in this book. Additionally, easily understandable Zen mindsets and philosophical messages are shared in this book. For those who want to practice directly in this book, I've also prepared a workbook. The writing tips and techniques are the same as in the Zen Mindfulness Shodo book. Each page allows you to practice one character. If you're interested, please see the description. When you practice with a brush, I recommend that you place a few pieces of paper under the page that you're writing on, so that the ink doesn't bleed onto the page under it. Alright, let's get started. Before you start writing, take a deep breath and clear your mind. Slowly breathe in as much air as you can through your nose and exhale all the negative emotions that you've been holding until this moment through your mouth. When you are mentally ready to write, you can start writing. Check the starting point, end point, the angle of the stroke, and the direction of the curve. After that, without hesitation, aim for the end point and move the brush smoothly. Try to write slower than you normally write, putting your heart and soul into each stroke. However, if you move the brush too slowly, the ink will bleed and the lines will become thicker in areas where you don't want them to be thicker. And if you move the brush too quickly, the ink will fade and the lines will become thinner in areas where you don't want them to be thinner. Or the ink will disappear midway through, making the strokes shorter than you want them to be. So, concentrate on finding the right speed. Once you've finished writing the character, look at the character as a whole and think about what changes you should make next in order to make it look even more beautiful. Is the angle of the first stroke getting too close to the middle vertical or horizontal lines? Is the first point of the second stroke not too high or not too low compared to the middle of the first stroke? Do the ending points of the two strokes appear to be roughly at the same height? Of course, you don't have to take all the tips and points that I've told you and copy my way of writing the character. Trust your own sense of beauty and adjust accordingly. It's important that you are satisfied with the shapes of the characters you write. So, please use my tips and points as ideas and hints for adjusting the shape of the character to your sense of beauty. Of course, you can change the shape so much that it no longer looks like a character. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. Alright? Let's learn practice together again in my next video. Thank you for watching.